Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best-kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you. Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast. I am Greg Lemoyne, and I'm your single guy. And together with me again, I think Matt's still golfing from last week or last time we met. It's Kent.
And it's Kent, the cat guy, back with you. I'm so glad that me and the 100 listeners that I bring to the table are all here. I'm sure they're out there going, you know what? You got to listen to this. Kent's back on.
No, I think there's less than that. I think we have, besides my mom, I think, your wife listens, right? Does she even listen?
Well, I listened 7 times. Does that count as 7?
Oh, it's you that keeps listening to the episodes. So, if anybody's listening to this and you see our podcast counts, we have our majority, our 70%, comes from just Kent listening to our podcast. Whether or not he's on it or not, he listens to them time and time again. He memorizes our old podcasts, right?
I listen every week. I love the podcast. I love the work that you do, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm sorry that Matt's not here, but pretty soon we'll have a big celebratory podcast where all 3 of us are here.
He's busy. He's taking courses, and that's one thing that a lot of international teachers do is they find time to take either online courses or they take courses to stay abreast of, can I say abreast on?
You can say abreast on the air.
To stay abreast of their qualifications for school, right? So Matt's doing something else outside of school and education, but a lot of teachers, including myself, you have to keep your education up to date. Yep. So therefore, depending on what state you're from, you have to have a certain amount of hours or credits towards your certification for your state, and a lot of people do that from overseas. They may do it during the summertime when they go home, if they go home, or they do it online. I see a lot of that.
And the last 2 years have really expanded your online options. I know
choice.
And I know many teachers who do exactly what you're saying. They do their credits they need for their certification for the states back, for their home state back in the United States. I also know lots of teachers who study something like library, to get an MLS in library, in SHIP, or ESL, all sorts of things.
Well, a lot of our schools say that they do PD, and I think that's, I don't know, that's a whole different maybe it's a whole different discussion, but I think whether or not your school provides for PD, professional development, I think that a lot of teachers go off on their own to get certificates. They do summer program stuff. They do online throughout the year. A lot of people want to get their masters, and there's different schools and ways to do that online, more now than ever before. So we'll go and teach all week long, and then like Matt, we'll teach all week long, but then you have classes that are at you have to meet at least once a week at 3 o'clock in the morning because it's in a different time zone.
Yeah, one of my coworkers woke up at 3:45, went online at 3:45 because he was working on his principal certificate.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that's a wide range of things that are available to people overseas. You don't always have to get your master's before you go overseas. A lot of people don't have masters, right? And they'll go through different programs. Sometimes even the school will host one of the school programs to come to their campus, and you can get a master's. And I'm only saying that because I know that Framingham does it. What's another one? SUNY or SUNY?
Oh, yes.
Right, from New York, out of New York. There's 2 or 3 or 4 different programs, and probably more now that are doing it online. But they would actually come to our campus. And when I was in Kuwait, I got my master's degree in education by joining their face-to-face, and we did 11 or 12 different long weekends. They would come, the professor would come to your school.
Yep.
And Lehigh, I think, does that also, Lehigh University.
And here, our listeners might know that we're here in the Middle East. Dubai is a place that have attracted a lot of American university satellites, and a lot of times they'll have professors right here in our region that you could go to them, or in some cases they'll come to you.
That's
well.
not a bad idea.
Close, yes.
And as you're coming into our podcast, you might be listening a little bit later, or not live, of course, but what am I saying? I'm just saying if you're joining our conversation now, which you're not, why do I always say that? Because they're starting our podcast and they continue the podcast.
Well, I think what you're trying to say is they're waiting for us with bated
Or did
breath.
they zip forward through the first half of the crap? Did they fast forward to like a meaty point?
I thought this was the good stuff.
Is this the meat of the act?
This is the meat of the act.
This is supposed to be the good stuff.
Don't go zipping past this.
All right, so I guess we're talking about education. We're talking about opportunities for teachers overseas. So if you leave and you go overseas, there are opportunities. Sometimes it's self-made. Other times you pay for it. I mean, you pay for it. Sometimes the school pays for it.
Yep.
That depends on the school, and that's as wide and broad as opportunity as the schools are themselves, right, globally.
That's right.
I guess it feeds right into the fact that if Matt's not here, we know he's studying and he's getting another degree or getting some kind of certificate by joining online stuff. But it was not as popular pre-COVID as it is now. Everybody's doing online stuff. I think it's fascinating. But that's one of the things that we do overseas to advance our own degrees. And I guess the main point here is, Kent, you have to stay up on your certification, your teaching certificate, because you never know when you're going to want to go home. If family brings you home, if something happens, you need to go home and teach. You want to have certain things still up to date, and certificate is one of those.
Well, it's not just do you want to be up to date, but you got to stay up to date on the rules. Some states make it difficult for you to keep up with your certificate being overseas. Sometimes they have requirements for you to be in person in the state to do things. So make sure you study up on your state. When you're planning to go overseas, make sure you make a plan for how you're going to renew your certificate, because I got news for you. That 2 years or 3 years or 5 year life of your certificate goes very quickly. And it's never too soon to start planning to keep it up to date.
Well, the other thing is if you want to go and recruit, right? Let's say you're recruiting in 3 years. Your plan, you stay at a school, and you plan that you're going to stay at that school for 3 or 4 years above the contract of 2 years. Most schools have a 2-year contract. Your plan, your life plan is that you're going to stay at that school for 3 or 4 years. Most states have their renewal within 5 years. So if you're there and you reach your renewal and you don't renew your teaching certificate, when it comes time to go into your resume, beef up your resume and look at all your credentials, you go to a job fair, and if you're not up to date, who knows what could happen. Some schools require you specifically to be updated. Other schools may not even look or let it go, let it pass up and just have you promise that you'll do it when by the next summer. But I like to think to err on the side of caution always.
I think that's very wise advice. And I think some countries, too, some governments, in order to maintain your residency, might have some rules around your certificate and your professional credentials as well.
Or to get your visa, right?
Or to get your visa, which allows you to live in that country. You could have a school that might want you, but if the government doesn't let you live in that country because you don't meet certain requirements, you could find yourself out of luck.
And this is so funny because we were talking about the podcast beforehand, and our choice for this podcast was a completely different subject, but we just went with it, right? We decided to talk about education and how do we keep on top of the lingo and keep on top of the most recent education practices and pedagogy that we can, and news and things like that. So yes, besides the International Teacher Podcast, there's a lot of ways that you can keep up to date on your pedagogy and get your certificates and make sure that your state certification is maintained, right? For all
essential.
Those reasons.
Many international schools will want you or require you to maintain your certification while you're at that school.
Correct. And you always want to have it for a new school and just in case.
Or like you said, if you want to go back to the United States and teach, you're going to need that too.
Right, but I don't want to do that. Do you?
I might one day. We'll see. I might. I have 6 years.
Have we ever talked about that? I don't know.
I don't think we've ever talked about it. I have 6 years in in my home state, which is Washington State. And to qualify for their pension system, you need to have 10 years in. So maybe one day I'll go put my other 4 years in.
So you mean that you taught for 6 years already and you gathered pension with them, then you left and you still have, or you taught for 4 years?
you need to be there for 10 years in order to be vested in their system. So as of now,
listeners, this is basic math. Okay, so 10 is the maximum to be vested. You
Yes,
already
the minimum.
have 4
I got
before
6.
you left over. 6.
I had 6 years. Yep.
Like you said, you have 6 before you left.
Yep.
And if you go back, you'll go back to the same school system, hopefully, so that you can put in 4 before you're vested.
That's correct.
All right. Well, see, I've never taught in the States, so I did all my training and everything, but I never officially taught in the States. So it's strange to me, right? And a lot of teachers go overseas with the idea that they might just go over for the 2-year contract, and they might be forgiven and given like a time away from their district. I don't know how that works. But
my first job overseas, I was given leave
Right.
from my district in the United States, and they originally granted me 2 years. And then I wrote to them and said I'd like to stay a 3rd year, and they said you can have a 3rd year. And then I returned to them in my 4th in the 4th year. I returned to their district because I was still teaching, employed by that district, and then so I was able to return to it.
So I know universities, they call it sabbatical for professors, right? Is that called sabbatical
We
for
call
a
it
teacher?
leave. In my state, Washington State, we just called it on leave.
Are you sure that they didn't just say, Kent, we need you to leave?
I might have misunderstood them now that I think about it.
In your case, it's just called leave. Like, leave, Kent. Don't come back. Leave.
You know, I would say to our new teachers out there, if they want to go overseas, don't be shy about asking your district for a possibility of going on leave. Many districts are very understanding and open to that.
And they can be very transparent because I've always said, be as transparent as possible with your current leader, your current principal, superintendent, whoever you're asking for your letters of recommendation. You have to be transparent that you are leaving so you can give them, they can be fully aware of it and give you a great recommendation and not be blindsided by the fact that you're going to a job fair or someone's asking for a recommendation, because it's not always negative, right? But I tell you what, if principals and superintendents would much rather hear it from you first rather than be surprised that find out that someone's asking them for whether or not they should hire you.
I think you want to keep them in the loop because your administrators back in the States play a key role, I believe, in helping you get that job overseas. I think keeping them in the loop is a very
if you're back
wise.
in the States. Otherwise, it's your current principal.
Otherwise, it's your current principal overseas. That's correct.
Right? And I've always held that as a sacred thing. I've always been very transparent. And I shouldn't say always. I do have a dark past in one school, but we don't need to talk about that right now. We can talk about that in a future one.
Maybe someone will call in and give us that story.
Oh God, a call in.
We need a call. We need some callers.
Let's change
Yes.
change flavors a little bit here, and let's change topics.
Yes.
I want to bring up something here, Kent, that is really super important because they don't always talk about this at job interviews. You don't always find out until the end, and all the questions are out there, but maybe you don't even know to ask about this kind of idea. Let's bring up the topic about arrival in your new country, okay? Now, before we say anything, we need to remind anybody listening that, like any other topic, this depends on the school that you go to, in the country that you go to, and it's never the same. But we are giving some insights on what some can expect, what you can ask about their onboarding process. I love that word, onboarding.
Onboarding, the process of arrival. And I think it's sometimes a measure of the quality of a school when you ask them, what is your onboarding process? If they have an answer, if they have a system for bringing you in, you know they're prepared for you. If they look at you like they don't know what you're talking about, you might want to ask a few more questions.
Shazam. I love the way you brought that up. It is critical for you to be aware that some schools will bring in their new teachers, and upon arrival, even before arrival, there's a lot to talk about. But let's just say you're arriving in country, and you get to the airport, and in that country, you arrive with your baggage, and what happens next? Now, there's a ton of ways this could go, right? And I just had the greatest conversation. Just last week, I had talked to a teacher, and her first year overseas, she landed in the country, and no one was at the airport. No one. And I don't even need to say what country because it could be anywhere.
Yep.
It's happened around the world with some schools.
Yep.
It was a very small startup school. Then they got something got mixed up with communication. They didn't expect her at that time. Anyway, she shows up at the airport, and there is no one there. And if there's no one there, like, who do you know how to call somebody? I mean, can you?
You don't have a cell phone
maybe that works in that.
You don't
country
even know
yet?
how the cabs work, if there are even cabs there.
Or the language. You may not even know their language. I know that English goes a long way, but that's a drastic move. And you know what? I haven't had it happen to me in 7 schools.
In my 2 schools, I haven't. And let's remind our listeners that usually when you're traveling overseas, you've got all your luggage. You're usually arriving at some hour in the middle of the night and morning, midnight, 1:30 in the morning. You're tired. You've been on a plane probably for 10, 12, 15 hours with a layover in the middle. And so you're not in your best form when you hit the ground. So to have to navigate a new country on your own at not peak performance, it can be challenging.
That's true. Even if you're a seasoned traveler, it could be challenging.
Yeah, for all of us.
So I guess, Kent, what's one of the questions you'd give a school recruiter about onboarding process?
You know what? The first thing I might say is, hey, would you meet me at the airport?
Good question, yeah. Are you going to actually meet me at the airport?
And my first school, I landed at 2 o'clock in the morning. When you fly to the Middle East, it seems like every plane lands at 2 in the morning. Don't ask me why. But there they were. You know, the director, the assistant director, the business manager, maybe another teacher. A good school will have someone there waiting for you at 2 in the morning when you get off that plane, and they're going to walk you through that process as best they can. And at my first school, they met me and got me through the whole process and got me in a van and drove me at 2:30 in the morning straight to a place that they had already set up for me, put food in it, put supplies in it, gave me a little bit of money, and said, well, we'll see you at the school in a couple of days. And they said, when you're ready, call us, we'll give you a ride. Couldn't have been any smoother.
Nice. I think that hopefully the school that you go to has some kind of a process to minimally make sure that someone's at the airport to get you to your apartment.
Yeah.
And no matter what, you have a safe place to be, right?
That's right.
Like, unfortunately, there are stories out there where you arrive for different reasons, and that's all about preparation, communication beforehand. But the school should provide, and like you said, ask them, will you be meeting me at the airport? Very good question to start with.
Yep.
And if they don't, if that person personally is not, they might have some system set up where they will meet you with a bus, and the minibus gets a cohort of you. Mm-hmm. If you have if it's 5 or 6 people arriving, sorry about spitting on you there. No, if there's 5 or 6 people arriving, hopefully they'll have a minibus. The minibus picks all of you up and takes you all to your camp or to your school, and they'll drop you off at your apartment, hopefully.
That's a great way to meet people you're going to work with. What's your next question after you ask them?
I don't know what else I'd after.
You know what my next question is?
A bit like, when do I have to be there?
Yes.
Like, when school starts like August, let's say August starts August 4th, I'd be like, when am I expected to be there?
When does work start?
But of course, the answer is going to be, we don't, it depends on the school.
Yeah.
But I guarantee it's got to be at least a week before the kids arrive. The new teachers. Right?
Yes.
It's at least a week. I mean, bare minimum.
Because the orientation for new teachers is definitely, I think, part of that onboarding process.
Let's let them know a little bit. So we don't really know the questions. Those 2 big questions can be answered, but they're dependent on the actual case by case.
Yeah, but you won't know unless you ask. You can't just assume.
Should ask that.
You can't assume someone's going to meet you at the airport, and don't assume you'll know what day you need to start work.
But here are some of the things that you can look forward to at some of the schools.
Yes.
And these, after hearing about these, you might ask if they provide this kind of stuff, right? These kinds of things. So let's get into a few things. What are some of the things you mean with orientation, Kent? They pick you up at the airport, they drop you off at your apartment, and boom, you have a week before school starts. What are some of the things that we can share with our audience about that?
Oh, boy. Well, one thing is how much work do you need to do to prepare for the students? Is your room set up? Do you have a room? Are there supplies in the room? Is there curriculum in the room waiting for you? I mean, if you have to do all of that work yourself, that week is going to be not enough. But if you have a week to settle in and get your feeling, get your feet on the ground, the they'll probably teach you about their curriculum. They'll probably talk about the academics at the school. Hopefully, that week they give you a checklist of how do you get the internet? How do you get a phone? How do you get a SIM card? Here's some addresses for grocery stores or grocery markets. Just all the small things that we take for granted in the, where we live in the States. You know where to go get aspirin. You know where to go get your food. You know how to get the lights turned on and the SIM card and the cell phone. But you're not going to know all of those things.
Well, you jumped right into it. I was thinking more along the lines of, okay, I land in Honduras, right?
Yes.
They get the minibus, and we have a bunch of us sent off to our apartments, and we have a week before or so or more before we have to teach.
Yep.
But I land in my apartment, and that school actually gave me a roommate at the time, so it was weird. But my roommate and I, or maybe he didn't arrive later, but I get into the apartment, and it's like, whatever hour of the night. I set down all of my suitcases and stuff, and I just want to have like a drink. So my mind immediately goes towards like, what do you do once you're in this apartment? Well, this school, they knew that they were having incoming staff, so they had new apartments set aside, whether they rented them for the teachers or if it was, they do it later. But if they have apartments set aside for you, then they usually leave a little package of coffee. They'll leave a few pots and pans. If it's not fully furnished, it depends on the school. Some schools might furnish their apartments.
Yep.
Well, this one, I showed up and I just needed a few things. I needed like a glass of water. So there's a bottle of water. There's like a welcome to Escuela Internacional. And there's like a Coca-Cola and some peanut butter and some bread. There's enough to get me through the next couple of days for snacks.
Yes.
Or at least until they took us to the school for like the morning breakfast. Like they had something set up, or we met at a restaurant the next morning. So you arrive and they're like, we're not going to see you for the next, here's 20 hours to sleep and we'll pick you up. We're all going to take you out to dinner or breakfast or something. Meanwhile, we've stacked your refrigerator with a few essentials just to keep you started because you don't know where everything is. So there might be some milk and some cereal. There's going to be some of that. What is that terrible coffee that you tear apart the little thing and dump? It's instant coffee.
That's like Folgers.
Around the world, they have this instant coffee.
It's the same
It's
everywhere,
terrible.
isn't it?
Nescafe. I hate it. They're going to give you some, but they're going to have a little cup for it. But whatever, it's enough to settle in and not go to bed hungry, not go looking for a grocery store. You don't have wheels yet. You don't know where you are. You may not even know how to get out of your apartment.
Am I the only one who has that care package that's meant for a week eaten in one day?
Well, whatever it is, if they leave you something, the plan is, at least in my experience, I've been very lucky that if it's an apartment situation, then the food has been taken care of by either they get you to a grocery store through the orientation, they give you a list of things you're going to do, school stuff and life stuff.
Yes.
Right? And I remember at a school where the first thing they did was they put you together with somebody else that's been there before, that's there during the summer. Maybe they held back and they said, I'll take care of one of the new teachers. And that person took me to a grocery store in their car, took me to get a cell phone set up, taught me about the internet. That was just amazing. It was like a little mentor for the day. Other schools are different. They might do it as a group where your whole group goes and gets a cell phone at the same time at the local mall. And then they go to a grocery store and they load up the entire bus with groceries for you. And you're like, oh, my God, what is this language? What does that mean on the label, right? You don't know these things. It's an event. So some of the teachers, hopefully, that you're going to be teaching with that are seasoned from that school will also be there to meet with you. But that's maybe or maybe not. We don't know.
I think this period of time, this onboarding process can be the most exciting. It can also be the hardest, depending on how the school organizes it. But for me, it's always been the most exciting time. It's been the time where you're learning a new country, learning everything from scratch, getting to know people. I had a mentor when I arrived here at the school that we're at, and that person has been sort of my quasi-mentor ever since then. They even this many years later, I still have questions for them. So I think for me, it's always very exciting. I always enjoy rolling into a new country. I remember small things that you wouldn't even think about: how to use the key in the lock, how to turn the light on, what you can plug in and what you can't plug in. Don't plug in your favorite electrical device till you know what's going through those wires.
So you're learning from somebody that's already been through it.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And a good school will pair you up. They'll already have someone in mind for you. And they'll think about, Greg's a single guy. Let's get him hooked up with a single guy because he's going to teach Greg about the things that single people do. Kent's a married guy with cats. Let's get him a married guy with cats to mentor him.
Well, and I'll never forget, this is my favorite story of onboarding process. Here's my favorite story. I got hired for Venezuela from Cambodia, right? So I was going from the country of Cambodia. I was going to the country of Venezuela. In the summertime, I told them I was going to arrive in Venezuela a little bit early before everybody else just to drop off luggage. And then I was going to go to the States, like my little repat, and then come back. But I just wanted to drop things off, get a lay of the land, say hi, see the school, and then maybe get an idea of since I was going back to the U.S., I could get a feel for a few things I might want to mule back for myself, right? I might want to get X, Y, Z and put it like toilet paper and put it in my suitcase before I came back to Venezuela. And it was a unique opportunity. So during that summer, my superintendent, I loved this guy. He's awesome, all right? So Mike is his name, and I won't say his last name on the podcast, but Mike meets me at the airport, just Mike, and he says, welcome to Cambodia, right? Welcome to Venezuela, bienvenidos, right? And he picks me up at the airport. He drops my stuff off at my apartment, gives me a look at it, and says, there's the car that you bought. I'm like, yeah, there's the car that I bought unseen. there's that car. He's like, but listen, I've got this all set up. Why don't you sleep for a couple hours, and as soon as you wake up, give me a call. Probably in the evening, I'll check in on you. I've got one of the school board members going to meet with us. We're going to go out and we're going to get some food. And I said, okay, this sounds great, And I mean, it was the superintendent of the school. There really wasn't anybody else there that summer, but the superintendent met me by himself at the airport. He's the one that had hired me. He's like, here you are. And boom, sets me into my apartment. I just sort of crash, just drop everything and crash for a couple hours. And then next thing I know, he's knocking at the door. So he and I and the school board member, we get in his car, and they're like, Greg, we figured you're coming from Cambodia and you've been around the world, you like street food. And I'm like, yeah, I love street food. So we go to this little street vendor down the road that's just like parked, not even in a parking lot or anything. It's at the end of the side road, right? In the barrio somewhere. It's like way off over here. And it's this guy that just makes fantastic empanadas and local food, right? And they had, I can't even remember exactly what it was, but you're eating street food. Most people don't eat street food right when they get to a country. They usually ease into it, right? But these guys knew, and both of them were really neat people to talk to. Mike had been there for a while. The other person had been there for a long time too, and actually was from Venezuela. So what I was doing was I was hanging out with two people that really knew what they're doing. They knew my history. They said, let's go and have some street food. I'm like, sweet, bring on the beers. I don't even think we did beers, but we did have local street food vendor stuff. And I went back to that street vendor multiple times afterwards because it was really good food. I don't recommend that for somebody else that hasn't been overseas very long, But I was coming from one third world country to another, so my iron stomach at the time was perfect. At the end of all of that short stay, I got an idea, and it worked really well. I came in with the cohort later on. Didn't say much, but, I had already been there. But I fit in well with the new incoming teachers, and we all sort of grew together as a cohort, was what they call them. And the few teachers that came in that year, I was glad that I came back at the same time they did, because being there beforehand would have segregated me. And this was a lot of fun. But that was a very extreme answer because it's from one country to another, and it was ahead of time. It was in July. and it was pretty seasoned kind of travel at the time. But I thought I'd share that one story with you because the street food, man, usually you're being treated to like the best of the best, right? In Egypt, when I arrived in Egypt and all of us arrived together, the first night they take us out to this huge restaurant, which is on the river, okay? So you are in Cairo. You are on the, what's the name of the river? You're right on the
Nile.
Nile.
Oh no, Tigris Euphrates probably.
No, it's you're
the
right
Nile?
on the Nile.
Okay.
Like boom, you're on the Nile. Like a brain fart. You're on the Nile on a riverboat. I didn't know that they had cement like posts keeping them there. You know, it was terrible. But I remember the first night we went out to eat, and there's like 20 of us. They took us to this huge restaurant, posh place, right? And I ordered 2 things off the menu. It was like, I'm just going to grab 2 quick things. And what I didn't know, when they brought them back, one of them was parakeet. 2 little parakeets in this little, it was this little gravy boat, right? And I looked into this little gravy thing, and there's these 2 little lumps inside the gravy, and I couldn't read Arabic. It wasn't in English, and I was like, whatever. So I tried one and put it in my mouth, and it's like this crunchy. I'm eating the bones. I'm like, this is, and I just sort of pushed it aside and said, anybody want my other
Parakeet?
I don't know. I think I just drank beers after that. It was terrible. Wow. But it was a different situation. In Egypt, our group was brought together as a cohort. We went out to a huge restaurant. I love the onboarding process at schools, even though not all of them are the same. Each one's a little bit different. It's challenging sometimes, right? Exciting in all ways because that's when they let you know how to go grocery shopping, how to get your internet, how to open your door if you need to, because keys are different around the world. There's a lot of little things that they take care of, and you know why they do it? They take care of you in your time of change because you're going through a huge, whether you know it or not, you're going through a huge session of culture shock. So the things like the only real place that you feel sort of at home is probably in your classroom, right? I'm in my classroom. I feel I'm a teacher. I know what to do. And, of course, all the things going on. But in your apartment and outside your apartment, you've got grocery stores. You've got a phone you can't figure out. Maybe your water heater is different. Those things have to be taken care of by somebody else to get you through that first couple of weeks.
And I think the other thing to remember is that they've been through the same thing that you've been through, and they know what you're going through. And for me, I remember there was a problem with my shipment. It got destroyed in the rain, and I was really upset about many of my things not making the journey intact. And one of the other teachers just took me aside and said, listen, this is a problem now, but in 3 months it's going to seem like a lifetime ago. And sure enough, it's true. Sure enough, I think that those teachers who have been around, those administrators who have been around, who could teach you the best places to eat street food, the best restaurants, can teach you all the things that you need to know, they're invaluable. They're invaluable, and they're going to help you, I think, physically, materially, spiritually, philosophically. It's seek people out like that. If your school doesn't facilitate that relationship, find it and build it yourself. And then you and I are in a position now to offer those things to new people.
And we're offering them now because we want people to know about these, that they exist. These are not things you'd normally ask about. But if I was going in a position, I was interviewing for a new school, I might see on there that says housing is not furnished, right? Maybe sometimes they say that. Housing is not furnished, but we give you a stipend. My first question then would be, when I arrive, is there a process? Are we held up? Are we being put up in a hotel?
Yep.
Are you putting the whole cohort into a hotel? Because I've done that. In Cambodia, they put me in a hotel for a week and extended that week for 2 weeks for some people, depending on their situation. But they set us up with, what do you call apartment hunters, or what do you call them, the people. I've never bought a house before, but when
the
you go
brokers, maybe.
a broker, what else do you call them? You go and look at a house.
A real estate agent.
Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Even though my buddy's real estate agents. They had them for apartments for us. And in schools where they don't furnish your apartment or give you an apartment, right, that you have to look for your own and do your own dealing. Can you imagine landing in Cambodia where they speak Khmer and having to just not even knowing where the grocery store is, but having to go and find an apartment that you don't even know where the school is? How do you get to school from the hotel? How would you find an apartment unless you had help? So in that case, if they are a school that only supports with stipend for their living, you might want to ask them about the onboarding process.
You might also want to ask how far your stipend's going to go.
Well, yeah, cost of living is it $610 a month, $650 a month? Is that supporting half of my apartment complex, half of my complex rent, or is it a quarter of it, or historically what was it? That's a great question.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, but you know what we have to do?
What do we have to do?
We have to stop.
We have to stop. What about our 100 listeners that somehow I've taken how many we actually have and multiplied it by 4? What about our 100 listeners? Won't they be disappointed if we end now?
I don't think so. I think we've given them, I've given you an idea of some of the things to look forward to for onboarding. And I'd almost like to push this to part 2 because I have so many stories, like the woman that disappeared after 2 days. I swear to God, one woman lasted for 2 days at a school and just hauled off and left. Didn't tell anybody. I want to tell that story later sometime. So look forward to part 2.
Great.
There's other things to be said about onboarding and arriving in a country, what schools could do for you as an international teacher here on International Teacher Podcast with
Kent the Cat Guy.
Standing in for Matt and Greg Lemoyne, the single guy. And from now on, I'm just going to say Kent and Greg and Matt. I think that's what we need to start doing here is become a real process.
Till the next time.
Love it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.